YouTube. My name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. In this video, I'm going to talk about some books that I read recently, and these books have in common that they are all at least 2,000 years old. Not the books themselves, of course, but the content of the books. In the month of June, there was the readathon called Ancientsathon, hosted by Jennifer Brooks, David Wiley, and Tori from Hufflepuff Discovery. And they were basically inviting us to read books that were written no later than the year 1700. And among the books that I read for that particular readathon was the Aeneid by Virgil. And I guess that got me in the mood for ancient classics because in the month of July, that's the only one I read in June. The others I read in July. And in the month of July, I read a whole bunch of other books. I might as well show them right now, and I will put timestamps in the description box. So if there's one of them that you're more interested in, you can go straight to that. So I also read Gilgamesh in two versions. So that is the oldest book, the oldest written text that has survived until our days. I read the Homeric hymns, and I read a few Greek plays. So not all of them. I read two versions of Electra, and the other one was Helen by Euripides. So the two versions of Electra were by Euripides and Sophocles. The first book that I read was the Aeneid. In the month of December of last year, so December 2021, I read for the first time in my life the Iliad by Homer. And if you had told me like 2 weeks earlier, in 2 weeks you're going to read the Iliad and you're going to love it, I wouldn't have believed you, because I'm pretty sure that in mid-November I was not at all in the mood to read the Iliad. However, I went book shopping at a used bookstore and I found a version of the Iliad for $3, and I knew it was the choice of the Eclectic Book Club that was hosted by Shelley Swearingen and David Wiley. So I decided to join the club and read the Iliad. And I just loved it. I loved it. It was a revelation to me. And then in January, also with the Eclectic Book Club, we read the Odyssey. And that time I read the translation by Emily Wilson. And I loved it. And I was determined to read more books, more ancient classics, more books set in the world of the Iliad, and more about ancient Greece and mythology, I guess, in general. And then I did nothing with that until the month of June. And then in June, I read the Aeneid, which is basically part 3 of this Trojan War trilogy. Of course, the Iliad and the Odyssey are translated from the Greek. They are attributed to Homer, though it's very unlikely that they were written by the same person. They may even have been written by multiple persons, and they are probably transcriptions of an oral tradition. This one is quite different. It was written in Latin, and it was written to be written. It was written to be read. It was not the product of oral tradition. It was composed on, well, not paper, but papyrus or something like that. So it reads very differently. However, the inspiration from the Iliad and the Odyssey is quite clear, because Aeneas is a survivor of the Trojan War. He is a Trojan, so he's from the losing side, and his journey somewhat parallels that of Odysseus and that of Achilles. So in the first part, the journey of Aeneas parallels that of Odysseus because he has a hard time finding the place where he's supposed to go. An oracle told him that he is supposed to found a kingdom that will become eventually very powerful. So of course this is Rome. We have to understand that this is part of the origins, the mythological origins of Rome, even though this is several thousand, not thousands, but several hundred years before Remus and Romulus. We are set to understand that this is the first act in the foundation of Rome eventually down the line. So our hero Aeneas is traveling a bit all over the Mediterranean trying to find a place. At some point he ends up in Carthage, where he is very welcomed by Queen Dido, and Queen Dido is a wonderful character. I would recommend you to read the book just to meet this character of Queen Dido. She is unfortunately caught between two goddesses. She's caught in the rivalry between Venus and between Juno, and that leads to her downfall, I guess. I don't know if I should say spoiler warnings for books that are that I guess that I could, but I'm not going to say more than that. I'm just going to tell you, just go read the book. And Queen Dido is a wonderful character. And I think the chapters where she is in there, the chapters that concern her are chapters 2 to 4, or is it 3 to 5? So she's quite at the beginning of the book. And then our hero, Aeneid, still searching for his kingdom. He goes through Charybdis and Scylla, just like Odysseus did, and he eventually finds his way to Italy, to Latium, to the place where he will found his kingdom. And that part where he is finally in Italy is quite boring. That one I think is meant to parallel the Iliad. It's meant to parallel the fight between the Trojans and the Greeks, except that this time Aeneas is on the winning side. There's a friend of his who gets killed again. There's a parallel between Achilles and Patroclus. And that part is a bit more military, and that part is a bit less interesting in my opinion. In the first half of the book, because the parallels with the Odyssey were quite clear, and because I think the characters were better drawn, it felt more Greek in a way. It felt closer to the Greek tradition than the second part. I don't know why. In the second part, it felt more Roman. It's not that I've read a ton of Roman literature. I've read basically nothing, and I haven't read a lot of Greek literature. I've read basically the Iliad and the Odyssey up to that point, because I've read more since. But basically, that's all that I've read. But somehow I had the impression that the first part was a bit more in the Greek tradition, and that the second part was more Roman. Much more about military power and military might, and more pragmatic and a bit less poetic perhaps, though everything is in verse. Everything is in verse, so it's not a question of one is prose and the other one is not. It's just that feeling that I had when the second part was more military and frankly a lot less interesting. But however, I'm still very happy I read this book, and I think this translation by Robert Fagles is very good. I have no reasons to complain. However, I'm not going to run just to find another translation by someone else. I like the story, but maybe not that much. The first chapters, the chapters about Queen Dido and Aeneas, that is beautiful. That is a beautiful character, Queen Dido. But yeah, that was my my main read for ancientsathon in June. And then in July, I was still in the mood for classics. I went book shopping and I bought all the other books that I showed you. I bought them in July and I read some in July. So next I read Gilgamesh. So this is a verse narrative by Herbert Mason. I bought 2 versions of Gilgamesh. This one is a version by Stephen Mitchell, and I bought them at the same store, as you can see. In case you're new to my channel, I leave the price tags on the books because I think it's interesting information for my future self. So I started with this one for the very intellectual reason that it was shorter. And I was not disappointed. I got into Gilgamesh not knowing anything about it. I knew it was about a king in an ancient kingdom. I knew there were some parallels with the book of Genesis in the Bible, but that was it. I didn't know anything else about it. And it turns out that this is one of the most beautiful stories of friendship I've ever read. Because Gilgamesh, our king of Uruk, is a bit bored. He is too powerful, his people do not like him anymore, and some sort of prophecy happens that he's told he's going to meet someone, his equal, and that he's going to be to have an equal. So he's going to have a friend, basically. And that friend is Enkidu. So the gods create a man out of clay, and that man, Enkidu, lives in the wild with the wild beasts. And he behaves like a beast because he doesn't know any better. So he represents not uncivilization. He represents the primitive man, I guess. And one day a shepherd sees him, he's terrified, he goes to his father saying, I saw a man behaving like a beast and blah, blah, blah. The father says, okay, go to Gilgamesh, he's going to know what to do. He's going to send a prostitute to capture this Enkidu guy. Well, we don't know his name. Of course, the shepherd doesn't know his name, but the prostitute is going to attract this man, and with sex is going to civilize him. And this is exactly what happened. And eventually Enkidu, once he is civilized, meets Gilgamesh. They have a fight, but they recognize one another as equals, and they become friends. And then they go on some adventures. And now I'm getting into real spoiler territory. So if you're the sort of person who thinks that even ancient texts can be spoiled, I'm going to invite you to skip and use the timestamps to go to the next book, because I cannot keep talking about this without spoiling what happens in the rest of the book. So Enkidu and Gilgamesh go on adventures, and eventually Enkidu dies. It is in this book, in this version, it is made clear that it is because of Gilgamesh. It is his hubris that leads to an injury, and Enkidu dies of his injuries. And then Gilgamesh goes on a pilgrimage because he's seeking immortality. And he wants it because he wants to share it with his friend, Enkidu, perhaps to raise him from the dead. So he searches for immortality. He eventually meets the only man who is immortal, and that person is a copycat of Noah. And I should say Noah in the Bible is the copycat of that person in this book. The legend, well, yeah, I have to say the legend, the myth of the flood and the animals and all of that, it is taken almost word for word from Gilgamesh. So yeah, I'm going to stop there because then there's only another chapter. So I read this and I thought it was just the most wonderful story of friendship. It reads very quickly. It's in verse, it's in fragments also. And yeah, I thought this was wonderful to the point that I wanted to reread it right away. But instead of rereading this one, I had another translation underhand, so I decided to use this one. So this one is by Stephen Mitchell. Stephen Mitchell makes it clear that this is not a line-by-line translation. So I should perhaps have started with the origins of Gilgamesh. There is not a single original of Gilgamesh. The closest we have is a set of tablets, of clay tablets that were found in the ruins of Nineveh. And these tablets apparently date from approximately 1,200 years ago, or the text written on them, the text dates from 1,200, no, not 1,200 years ago. They date from 1,200 before Common Era, so minus 1,200. And these clay tablets, at some places they are fragmentary, some parts are missing. And there are 11 tablets that constitute the core of Gilgamesh. So that is what was in this book, and that is what is in this book. There was also a 12th tablet that apparently is some sort of, I'm going to use modern words here, but I'm going to say some sort of sexy fan fiction, sexy times between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And that was book 12. And there are also, I already forgot, was it 5 or 4 other poems found elsewhere in a different language that would be older than that, that also tell stories about Gilgamesh. So what Stephen Mitchell did was use the first 11 tablets found in Nineveh that constitute the core of Gilgamesh, and in the places where things were missing, he used the older stories to sort of patch things up. And he did not translate line by line. He also makes very clear that he wants to make the story interesting to modern readers. So he removes a lot of repetition, which were very common apparently at the time, which were part of good storytelling. It was a lot of repetition. I guess if people did not have access to book and reading, repetition helped make the stories more memorable. So well, perhaps like in modern songs, we have choruses that come back over and over again. So I guess it was something like that. But anyway, Stephen Mitchell decides to get rid of those and to present a story as lean as possible, except in the few places where repetition might be useful. And I realized while reading this version of Stephen Mitchell how different it was from the version from Herbert Mason. And I realized that this version was not close to the original. The main plot points were from Gilgamesh, but this one is clearly an interpretation by Herbert Mason. And he makes choices for the reader that are not made in the original. And he changes things in the original culture, I would say. Certain aspects of the friendship between Enkidu and Gilgamesh are erased, and certain aspects of the culture of this ancient culture were completely erased, and I have to assume it is to avoid shocking the modern audience because this was created in 1970, so 50 years ago. Perhaps readers were not quite ready to accept certain things. Certain similarities with the Bible were somewhat erased. In this book, it is made quite clear that Enkidu was created basically like Adam was created in Genesis. In this one, it's not quite clear. In this one, the woman who is sent to civilize Enkidu is not a prostitute. She is a priestess, because we are meant to understand that at the time, sex was something that could be used to praise the gods, was something to be used to celebrate life. So the woman sent to attract Enkidu, to civilize Enkidu, was not at the bottom of society. She was a very respectful woman. So I think that was changed. And also in the prophecy, when Gilgamesh is told that he's going to find an equal, he is told that he's going to take that man in his arm, embrace him, and kiss him like a man does to his wife. So basically, it's told right away that that friend is going to be your best friend, your lover. So that there's something similar to the relation between Achilles and Patroclus. And there's something that was common in the ancient world, that is a sexual relation between men, a sexual friendship between men, that somehow is not acceptable nowadays. And I think that was deliberately erased in this. And the other thing that is changed in this, I should say, that is not in here, is the reasons why Gilgamesh is seeking immortality. Here it is made quite clear that Gilgamesh is seeking immortality to share it with Enkidu, perhaps to raise him from the dead. However, here it's never explained why Gilgamesh wants immortality. Apparently he wants immortality just for the sake of it, because who wouldn't want that? So the differences are quite important. And now I want to read a third version of Gilgamesh, because I want to know which one is best. Because as a pure storytelling, this one is beautiful. It's so well written. It's a gorgeous story of friendship. But as an open window on an ancient culture, I think it misses the target. This one brings us much closer to the culture of Gilgamesh at the time of Gilgamesh. So I like both of these, but for different reasons. And now I want to read a third one, because why not? And then I read another book set in ancient Greece. This one is the Homeric hymns. It is a new translation by Michael Crudden. So these are hymns, like the title says. So basically songs of praises to the gods, sort of prayers, and they are attributed to Homer. Well, they are not really attributed to Homer. We know that they were written much later than the Iliad. So if the Iliad was written by Homer, then this cannot have been written by Homer. But they are in the spirit, in the vein, in the style of Homer. So something similar to what we find in the Iliad and the Odyssey. I did not quite like them, because I read epic poetry. That's the thing, this is not epic poetry. I read these ancient texts for the story very much, not so much for the language. And in these translations, in these hymns, the story is buried under a whole bunch of things. It's buried under a truckload of names. It's buried under formulas of praise to the gods. It's buried under a lot of things. So the story is hard to get to. So that's why I did not quite enjoy them. It was too much work. I guess I should reread them. Once you've read them and you know the basic story, perhaps it's easier to appreciate the rest, the language and the way the things are phrased. But on first reading, I cannot say that I really love them. There are 33 hymns in there, but there are only 4 that have a certain length. So hymns number 2 to 5 are several pages long, like 20 pages each. And then all the others are quite short, like 1 paragraph or 1 page or things like that. So these little ones can be more read as little poems. And the longer ones, that is where I was expecting some sort of epic poetry, but yeah, it's not quite there. So that one was an average read for me. And finally, I read a few Greek plays. So in this book, there are 16 Greek plays by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. I have no idea if I am pronouncing these names correctly, because I know how to pronounce them in French. I don't know how to pronounce them in English. And either way, both of us, whether English or French, we are wrong, because these are Greek names anyway, and probably pronounced in a very different way. So anyway, I read 3 of the 16 plays. I read Electra by this guy, Sophocles, and I read Electra, again, by Euripides. And I also read Helen by Euripides. In fact, I read Helen first. So Helen is is a sequel to the Iliad and the Odyssey. We are in a time after the Iliad. Well, not necessarily after the Odyssey, but after the Iliad. And it has a very interesting premise. In that play, Helen was never abducted. Helen never went to Troy. The person that went to Troy with Paris was a double of Helen, because Helen herself was sent by, I don't remember which, was it by the decision of Zeus, but I think with Hermes. Again, I don't know how to pronounce that in English. Hermes. So basically Mercury, the Greek version of Mercury. She was sent to an Egyptian kingdom to be protected by a king who could be trusted. And she remained pure, she remained faithful to her husband Menelaus, and it says that the Trojan War happened for nothing, because Helen was a virtuous woman from the beginning. And in that play, we find Helen is now somewhat in danger because the king protecting her died, and now it's his son who is king, and wants Helen as his wife. And of course, Helen doesn't want. She says, I have a husband, it's Menelaus, he's going to come back and he's going to pick me up. And of course, Menelaus arrives and things happen from there. So I thought it was super interesting, that double version, but also that version of Helen, who is a virtuous woman, because of course 2,000 years later, well, more than 2,000 years, but several millennia later, we think of Helen as a woman of little virtue, as a woman who cheats on her husband, who leaves her husband, as a woman who basically is at the source of every problem, of every man's problem. But in this book, no, in this version, in this play, this character of Helen is honest. She is an incarnation of virtue. And I thought that was just so interesting. I really love that character of Helen, one that is a pillar of virtue. It's wonderful. So I really love that play, and it is translated by Emily Wilson. So the same translator by whom I've read the translation of the Odyssey. And then I read two versions of Electra. Electra is, okay, well, I'm just going to make sure I don't get mixed up in all these Greek characters. So Menelaus has an older brother who is Agamemnon, who is king of a different kingdom. After the war, when he comes back, his wife gets him murdered because his wife, Clytemnestra, has found another husband and a lover, and she decided to have her husband killed. She has good reasons, mind you, because at some point Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to please the gods. Now, of course, it was to no purpose because the war happened anyway, and Clytemnestra is very angry by the fact that her husband decided to kill her child. So Electra is another daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. And in both books, in both versions, she is cast aside, set aside, and is basically robbed of her status as a princess because she would not approve, she does not approve of her mother's actions of killing Agamemnon. She protected her little brother, Orestes, these Greek names, and she is awaiting for her brother's return. So these are the things that are common in both versions. However, both versions are not necessarily presenting the same aspect of Electra. In one version, Electra is much more vengeful. She wants her brother to kill their mother. She is the one basically who places the knife in his hands. She is the one calling on her brother to have no mercy. And of course, as of filming this, I don't remember which is which. I'm going to check. I checked. In the version of Euripides, Electra is much more bloodthirsty. In that version, she is not married. In the other version, she has been married to a man who never touched her, knowing perfectly well that that princess was way beyond his poor status as a peasant. But in the Euripides version, Electra is a bit more vengeful. She is the one calling out her brother, urging her brother to kill their mother. But also in Euripides' version, Clytemnestra makes a much better case for why she acted the way she did. She is presented in a more human way than she was in Sophocles' version. So, I think that's it. It's been too long since I read them. It's been a full 2 weeks. Oh my God. So I'm going to read way more plays in that book. I have found something that I think is fascinating, and I'm just going to read more of them. They are quite quick to read. There are about 50 pages each, sometimes just 40 pages. So it takes a couple of hours to read because I read slowly and I take some notes. But it reads very quickly, and it's fascinating to see other sides of characters that we meet in other circumstances. So in this case, characters that we meet in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that we now see acting in a very different way. So I'm going to read more Greek plays. And that's it for my ancient books. Let me know in the comments if you've read these works, if you have other ancient classics to recommend. If you've read these works, is it in the same translations, or do you have different translations to recommend? Thank you everyone for watching. I will see you in the next video. Anna Poshen.